Alright, here's another update. This time the QuickShifter is installed on the motorcycle and is fully functional. So I'm gonna take you through a demo, then we're gonna do a walkthrough of the code, explaining what everything does, and then we're gonna see what's next with this project. So this is, the way I have it installed is I put it in shrink tubing, uh, just to keep it from touching other parts. Here's the little unit for detecting the gear, and with all the connectors. I explained this on the last video. Everything's there. There's my phone. It's not on, so the bike is not on, so it's not connected, but I'm gonna turn it on, power up, go through the gears, and then I'm gonna show you the panel of the motorcycle next to the phone as well, so you can see that everything's in sync with what it's doing. So let me power up the bike. There it is. So if I rev it, right, put it in gear. So that's first gear. Let me go through the gears as I rev it. Again. One more, this time faster. To the neutral. So you can see the shifter, how it can go up and down. Right, you see the throttle right here, along with the RPM. Very nice, that's coming down. And then I have the shifter sending me the voltage of what gear it's on. So that second gear, that's the voltage. That's first gear. Just so I can adjust it. And then it told me if it's shifting or not. This one here, you can see it says yes or no. Alright, one last time. Alright. So there's your demo. So let's walk through the code. I don't know if you were able to hear me talk. Motorcycle was pretty loud, and it's inside the garage. And the door is halfway open. It's still pretty noisy. So let's take a look at the code itself, and we'll have the phone visible as well, so we can. I need to explain all the settings or how everything works. Right, so there's the code. There's my phone, and here so I can explain what's going on. So let's go all the way to the top. This is running on an Atmega 328. It's not the P or the B, is the 328 without any letter at the end. And we're running it at 20 megahertz. And these are the libraries we're using. I also have a class just for serial communication with Bluetooth. And these are all my variables I need. Those are global variables that I'm gonna need just to keep track of everything that I need to do. Since the last video, I added those new variables. I have one for not controlling, but keeping track of these two settings, the lower shifting parameter and the upper shifting parameter. So when this goes, oh, you can't see it. There you go. So this is the lower one, this is the upper one. So when I shift, or when I'm trying to shift, this one goes down. So as soon as it crosses this right one here, then it cuts ignition and the gear goes through. If it goes above, this is supposed to rev the engine. We don't have that yet. So that's what that setting is for. This one, the 12% for the spark plug, what that is center this. So the voltage, or this is the 12 volts rail, and this will be the ground. I think that's how you write it. So when the motorcycle is not doing anything, it's at 12 volts on the spark plug. When it wants to fire or create a spark, first it pulls it to ground for a period of time, right? And then the time keeps going, and then it releases it, and then that gives it the spark. So, but in reality, how that looks is it looks like this. And when it gets to here, then it jumps through about 1,000 volts, and it goes like that. So the 12% is since we're keeping track of this section, how long that is from the previous spark, that percent, we want to keep it so we can extend this part here to make it longer and longer and longer, so the power of the motorcycle keeps diminishing. We're essentially cutting ignition, so we're just delaying the spark so it's not as powerful, to allow so it allows the gear to go in. And then we have the power up. That one is once we have it extended, so once we have this, once we're fully shifting to the maximum, I have it to the maximum 5 milliseconds, that will be the full extension. Then we want to bring it back to full power. So we don't just want to bring it all the way back to what it was immediately, because that would, if it's like a 600, 750, or a 1000, you can flip the bike in first gear, because it's a lot of power. It's like having no power and all of a sudden full power, full throttle. You can end up injuring yourself. So we want to bring it back little by little, right? In a number of steps, so to keep it smooth. The cut, you want to go as fast as possible, but bringing it back to full power, you want to be a little bit smoother. And it depends if you're riding on the street or riding on the racetrack. How aggressive do you want to be? The delay in milliseconds, that one is how long you want to keep it extended like this, right? How much time do you need to put in your next gear? Usually first gear goes at around 60 milliseconds, 70 milliseconds. It all depends again on how aggressive you want to be. Obviously you don't want to make it too short, because you can end up ruining your gears, because it won't engage fully, and then you can wreck your bike. And this one is the same, power up. So that's the one that controls how quickly or in how many steps you want to get from here all the way to here. The previous percent power up, that's how quickly you want to come back. So how fast you want to go back is the percentage. Let's say you want to extend it at 1.5% on every cycle, then it'll just go really quickly up to here. And then here you want to bring it back at, let's say you take the dwell time and multiply that by 0.999%, and it'll come back really smooth all the way to the back. Or if you just put 0.9% or even 50%, it'll just go whoop, in one step, and you're done. You're full power immediately, right? And this is obviously how long you want to wait in milliseconds for that power to come back. So let's say we have 2 milliseconds to come back to full power. Well, if you have 2 milliseconds and you have this, then it may just go up to here, and then it's gonna go jump right to full power. So those are just settings to manage how smooth you want your shifting to be. All right, so let's move on. This is just I explained this on the first videos. This is serial communication, my phone sending data to the processor. And this is the timekeeper. This is how I keep track of the time that has elapsed uh, for detecting the gap or the dwell of the spark plug. And I have it running at clock speed divided into 1024, which gives me roughly, it gives me it would be 1, 2, 3, 151, or 15. So it gives me 51 microseconds, 51.15 microseconds for every clock cycle that I go through here. Again, it's running at 20 megahertz divided by 1024. This is how long it takes to execute each one, or to come back to this function here, and that's how I keep track. So depending on how many my timer, then I can calculate that based with this on this time. I can calculate the gap of this. I also use that to calculate the RPM. Alright, so then we have this one for this function is the one that fires after this one. So let's explain this one first. This is the one for coil number 2, this whole function. And what it's doing is first I'm detecting to see if the pin is high or low. If it's high, that means that we are detecting this part here, right? The spark plug is not being pulled down, or it's actually being released because it was ground. So it changed, now we're in this function. So let me take a step back. This function here gets called every time the voltage changes on that pin. So if it either goes to ground or it comes back to full voltage and it gets fired. So if it comes back to 1, then we have full voltage, which is at 12 volts. And I'm just have a local variable because this function and the other one are identical, so I just need to change this to whatever coil I'm detecting. So I get I store my local time, which is the one here, right? I'm storing it here. This is the one for calculating everything. And then I check to see if my pin is true, and it wasn't true on the last cycle. You can see I'm taking it here at the end. Then it must have changed, and this is the one firing because it's not the same state as it was before. So then I store my RPM. Actually, I calculate my RPM, or my time for the RPM, which is the time that I'm getting right now plus my previous time, and that's my current time in clicks, or in ticks, tick cycles, I guess, in interrupt cycles, which is for every one or every tick we have 51 microseconds, 51.15 microseconds. And then we store the current one, so on the next cycle we can calculate it again to see if it's changing, right? So this is strictly for RPM, and the rest is for coil. So here we detect the coil as it's being uh, pulled down. So I keep the time, right? So I keep the time of when the coil is pulled to ground. Is it pulled to ground? Yes, pulled to ground. So this is in reverse. Is detected in reverse. Bear with me. I'll explain that. So I'm keeping the track of when it was pulled to ground, and then if it's shifting, if this global variable is true, that means that we're actually trying to shift to another gear. And if that is the case, then we come here, we want to calculate the delay of how long the gap is, or the dwell time, which is the one I was explaining before, this thing. So we want to calculate how big it is and multiply it by the whatever multiplier we have, and we'll get to that one there. So this is the percentage. If I want to increase it by 1.5% or 150%, then I can just put that 150%, multiply it, and then it will expand it. And then I check to see if the number of clicks or clocks is more than 100, then I set it back to 100. I don't want to go more than 100. So 100 clicks is about 5 milliseconds. The bike idles, I think, at about 4 milliseconds or 4.5. So there's no point on going any higher than that, right? Because then it wraps around and the resolution of the timer for firing the spark plug is only 255. So we only have 8 bits to play with. So 100 is good enough. And then obviously if it's less than 100, then we say, okay, well, the number we got is valid, so let's go with it. Then we we hold the we override the ECU by holding the ignition coil to ground. So even if the ECU decides to release it to fire, it's not gonna fire because we're still holding it to ground for overriding the ECU. And then we set our timer for output compare register B. We set it to whatever the count is plus our delay, and this count only goes to 255. So and it wraps around. So once it gets to 255, and it starts all over 1, 2, 3. So we don't have to worry if it overruns, because it'll just come back to 1. So we just add whatever the current number plus the delay, and then enable enable the is that the timer? Yeah, enable the timer. And this is the timer for B, or the timer input mask, yeah, for B. And that's it for this function. Then we have an else here. This is if it doesn't fall here, then we can check to see if the pin is in ground, and this one is true, it was up before. So it's essentially the reverse of this. So if that is the case, then we get the dwell time, the time minus whatever we had before, right, which is right here. So that's how we calculate this part right here. And then that's it. We just keep track of the state of the pin through this cycle and keep it for the next cycle. So once this thing is set, we hold the spark plug down, and this one resets it. So depending on the number we put here, once that runs through the clock, then it's gonna fire this one and fire the spark plug. This one's identical, those two functions. So this is the one detecting coil 1, and this is the one firing. The only difference here is that it doesn't have this. I'm only detecting the RPM on one of the spark plugs, or one of the coils. Here's the function I have for detecting the gear. This is just ADC. It's analog to digital conversion. And I'm throwing away the first reading. So I explained that on the last video. So GPS, the sensor for shifter, the throttle, and this one is just there, just in case I make a mistake when I'm writing the code. It'll just reset back to the top. And then I'm setting up for the next reading. So it's manual reading, is not automatic. I'm dictating when and what to read. We have a function here to get the gear depending on the voltage. So anything below 200 points of the voltage, then it's 0 or neutral. Anything below this is first gear, second gear, and so on. And then we have one for returning the gear in text. So you can see that if it's 0, then it just returns because I already set the buffer to n. Otherwise, it just converts the number to a text or whatever 1 through 6, and it returns that part. And this is for calculating the RPM. So here's the RPM cycle time, the one I was on coil number 2. So I just get this number and multiply it by this plus 1. I mean, divided by this, whatever number is in here, plus 1. We don't want to divide by 0 because then it'll crash the unit and possibly burn the fuse. So, here's what it's doing, 20 megahertz, right? Divided by 1024, we end up with 51.15 microseconds, which is the smallest measurement I can do. That's what it says right here. And this is the number of ticks per cycle. And this multiplied by 60 seconds, it gives me this big number. Multiply that by 2, and it gives me this number, which is the RPMs that I can get. So the minimum number RP or the maximum number RPMs or minimum. I don't remember exactly how, but anyways, I just did this so I can have a constant number that I can divide, and it'll give me the right RPM without having to do too many calculations. So I just have pre-calculated the number, and then it works. Obviously, this number would change if the division changes. Then I will have to recalculate this one. This is just for writing my settings. You can see this one writes the settings, and this one reads the settings, and everything's in 2 bytes. So now these are my default settings. This is just when you first install the unit on the motorcycle. So we have your high trigger and low trigger, which would be this one, and this one, right? So that's your high trigger, this is your low trigger. And you can see that it's set as 505, and that's what it says right here, 505. And then this one, let me make it bigger. It's in the background. Anyways, so here's the 465, which is what you see over there on the screen, right here, right, and the 505. And then I have my dwell time, or the percentage, how I'm going to increase from this to this here to make it longer. So it'll just keep increasing all the way to here to 100. So from here to that, and then to that, and then to that, and you know, pretty much cutting power to the motorcycle. And it's at 1.4 or 140%, so 1.4%. And the reason I'm using a whole number is because if I want to save it as a float, which is a decimal number, it requires 4 bytes, and I don't have a lot of memory to play with. So by doing this, I can use 2 bytes, and I just have to divide it by 1,000, and we're good to go. I have 2 decimal places. So do the conversion. This is 1.4%, and that's how quick. For all the gears is the same. For first to 6, it's all 1.4%. That's at the rate that we're going to use to increase the dwell. And then this is the power up. You can see this one is at 0.99%, which is coming back really smooth. This one is a little less rougher, or a little more rougher, and then as the gears go up, you can see that it goes quicker and quicker, and it doesn't require a big percentage to come back to full power. This is the delay in milliseconds. You can see that in first gear I have 60 milliseconds, second gear 70 milliseconds, 65, 60, and the higher the gear, the smaller the weight, because there isn't a lot of torque, so you don't feel it. It's pretty smooth. And then this is the power up, so how quickly it comes back to full power. I have 70 milliseconds. This can be adjusted. This was just a safe number for me. I brought the bike to the gas station, and it was pretty smooth with those settings. And then this is just a loop for each of those arrays to save it into memory. So I'm saving my shift sensor, which is only 2, right? So this is right here. And then my dwell time or percent, my power up percent, delay milliseconds, and delay for power up in milliseconds as well. And then this is where I load them into my variables from memory. So this should be read into memory once, and then this one should be read all the time when it comes up to power, when you power up the motorcycle. And then as you change it with the phone, then this default settings will be overridden, and then when you power up, it'll remember those settings. And this is, you saw this on previous videos. I have this enabled now. This is for enabling coil number 1. I had it disabled. And this is my shifting function. So this is important. I go get my gear, the number of the gear. If it's less than 1, then I just return, because if it's in 0, that means it's in neutral. So I don't wanna cut power, and then you shouldn't be able to enter a gear when it's in neutral, because you can ruin your gear. So you have to use the clutch for that one. I sent a message saying shifting yes, which is the message you were seeing here, right? It would say yes or no. And then I get my multiplier. This is where it's calculated. So I get my second spark 12%, right, from the gear -1, because it's an array and it's 0 base. dividing by 1,000 to convert it into a decimal number, and then just wait the number of milliseconds, 1 millisecond, right, at a time. This is not accurate to the microsecond, but it works good enough. So I do that, then I set it back to, then I reset my multiplier to my power up percent, and then I do another loop, just like the previous one, just for waiting for that power up to finish. And then I set my variable to say I'm no longer shifting, so it can skip overriding the ECU and send my message that I'm done. I have a function updating my phone, constantly sending messages, GPS, throttle, shift upper, shift lower, my RPM, and my gear. This is just my voltage, so in case I need to modify it, I know what that is. I know what the voltage is per gear. And this is my main function, pretty small. Right, I have my setup, I loading my default settings. This is because I'm still debugging it. So default settings, and then I'm reloading them into my variables. Once I'm done, then that's gonna be no longer needed. And then I have my main loop, which is this whole thing. This is not being used right now, and it's gonna change. So this is what's being used. That's the main loop. So it waits 1 millisecond, and every cycle it goes and updates the phone. It sends it more data. Here's my new update. My shifting parameters are the shifting voltage needs to be greater than it needs to be less. Sorry, it needs to be less than whatever I have on 0, which is 465. If you remember on the default settings, this is my red. This one right here, and we're not this right here. So this one here is the one. So this is the shift sensor voltage, right? Is this one here? So that's this one, and this one is this one, which means that when it goes below that one, then it can cut power. But it also needs to say that we're not currently shifting, right? So it's only when we're not shifting, because if we're already shifting, there's no reason to do it again. And these are settings for later that I'm going to enable, because I also want to make sure that I have the throttle open, because if I'm not accelerating, then this wouldn't work anyways. So I need to have the throttle open to a specific range, at least moving forward a little bit, like 180 or so. I think it's 145, just with the throttle closed. RPM needs to be greater than 2000, so that so if this is open, then this should be going higher, right? So we should be moving. If it's moving, then we can shift. Also, we want to make sure that it's gears have to be anything between 5 and below, or 1 through 5, because if we're already in 6th gear, there's no point in trying to shift, because there's no more gears and we don't want to have power anymore. And if that is the case, we call our function to shift, and then we wait. We're just gonna loop through it, even though it doesn't come here, because this is a function, it's not a thread, so it's not gonna come out of it until it's done with that one. However, the reason this loop is here is because we want to make sure that that one hasn't been enabled by something else, just in case. The shift sensor voltage has to be released, which means that if you shift and put pressure on the lever and don't release it, it's not gonna fire right away again until you release it, because you don't want to keep cutting power over and over, right? You just want to shift once, and if you still have pressure on it, you don't want it to shift again, because it may cut power, but another gear is not going to go, because you have to let it go to disengage and re-engage, and then press it again. So, and it needs to be less than the shift sensor. This might be incorrect. Yeah, no, actually, this is fine. So what it's saying is, if we're shifting, or this one is below the this one right here, then don't shift again, right? Just stay in that loop. Wait 20 milliseconds, update the phone, come check again to see if we're done. So if this one is below that one, it means that we're just keeping pressure, and we just forgot. I guess we just forgot, or we're too slow. because when you shift, this thing is going to be it's going to be over before you even release pressure from the lever. And then once it comes out of that loop, then it just sends an update to the phone saying we're no longer shifting. Hold on. Um, so, and we send it again once it's outside. So every time it goes through here, if it doesn't land in this, if it doesn't execute this block, then it just sends this message on every loop. On every loop it updates the phone. I'm sending this message independently of everything else. So what's next? I guess next is gonna be let me show you. So next is gonna be creating a driver for this. This is just an actuator, and this one's gonna be revving the motorcycle for us when we want to downshift. So we got the upshifting done. Now we want to be able to downshift automatically. And what I mean by that is when I put pressure on the opposite direction of the lever, we want to make sure that this thing, well, that's the opposite. So we want to make sure that it pulls out, right? So we need a driver to control this thing. So essentially we want it to pull out, accelerate the motorcycle, and then pull back out. We don't want it to get stuck, so it's just that. At like 20 milliseconds, 40 milliseconds, we don't know. But we need that driver. This one runs at 3.5 amps. So we need a powerful driver that is going to be able to drive this, and it's going to take a signal from my unit, which is just 5 volts, and this one runs at 12 volts. So we need another device that we're going to create for this. So I believe that's it. I'm not missing anything. I'm going to give you one last demo, but this time it's going to be next to the motorcycle, so you can see the cluster as well with the phone, and you'll see it power up, or you'll see it on, and you'll be able to see the you will be able to see the acceleration, the gears, everything in it. Right, hopefully. Not sure how well, but we're gonna try. So turn this on. Put in gear. So that's first gear. Right. That's my phone. I can't see it that well, but you can see there's a slight delay. So there you have it. So that's my QuickShifter. It's connected to the bike. It's fully functional. It works. It's really smooth. The next step is doing what I said, doing something to rev the engine for me when I want to downshift. And obviously, we also want to configure the application to be able to modify those settings from the phone. So that's a lot of code that I still need to add to this thing. So, alright, next video will be creating a driver for this one. and then a video after installing it, and that should be done. Then they will be just writing code for the application to be able to modify the settings from here. So right now I can just go here and I'm ready to go. I can power up the bike and it goes, immediately connects. Come back in and then powers up. Thermal opens, really nice, right? Disconnect. So that's all I have. That's a pretty long video, 35 minutes. All right, enjoy.